The freedom of not making life cinematic. There was a man who spent his entire life carrying a film camera. He didn't know he was carrying it. He simply thought this was what life was. He woke up in the morning and the camera was already running. Someone insulted him, click, a scene. Someone ignored him, click, another scene. He failed, click, the suffering scene. He succeeded, click, the comeback scene. He bought a car, click, the arrival scene. He met a beautiful woman, click, the romance scene. Someone who had once underestimated him saw him again, click, the revenge scene. And slowly, his entire life became a movie. Not because anyone else was making it, he was. He had a hero, himself. He had villains, the people who had made him feel small. He had a plot, one day I will become somebody. He had a climax, one day they will all see. And he had an audience. Even when nobody was watching, he imagined them, his family, his relatives, his friends, the woman he wanted, the people who doubted him, and he was constantly asking, what do they think of me? That question became the soundtrack of his life. One day, he was driving alone. There was no audience, no family, no woman, no enemy, no one to impress, just the road. And something occurred to him. He looked at the entire movie he had constructed, and for the first time he saw something strange. The camera was in his own hand. Nobody has forced him to film. Nobody had told him this must become a story. He had done it himself. He had taken ordinary events and given them enormous meaning. A person didn't say hello. He turned it into disrespect. A person succeeded. He turned it into comparison. A woman was beautiful. He turned it into a fantasy. A failure happened. He turned into a future comeback. A car was purchased. He turned it into proof of his transformation. He had been taking ordinary life and converting it into cinema. Then he asked a very simple question. What if I stop filming? Not what if I become more successful? Not what if I defeat them? Not what if everyone recognizes me? Simply, what if I stop filming? And suddenly something became quiet. Someone could insult him. He didn't need a revenge scene. Someone could admire him. He didn't need a validation scene. Someone could ignore him. He didn't need an inferiority scene. A woman could attract him. He didn't need a romance screenplay. He could want money. He didn't need money to become evidence of his worth. He could succeed. He could fail. He could become extraordinary. He could become completely ordinary. Nothing needed to become a story about him. And then he discovered something almost frightening. Ordinary life was incredibly peaceful. There was no climax, no constant anticipation, no need to know what happens next. He could have a boring Tuesday and nothing was wrong. He could sit quietly, nothing was missing. He could drive without imagining the future. He could talk to someone without monitoring how he appeared. He could meet someone beautiful without constructing an entire future. He could encounter someone who disliked him without creating an enemy. And for the first time, he wasn't constantly asking, where is this going? He was simply where he was. That is what freedom means here. Freedom isn't, I finally got everything I wanted. That is still dependence. Freedom is, I don't need everything to happen. That's a completely different thing. Imagine a prisoner who has spent 20 years trying to decorate his cell. He changes the walls. He buys better furniture. He gets a bigger bed. He paints the door. He convinces himself, one day, I will make this cell beautiful enough that I will finally be free. Then one day someone opens the door. The prisoner says, but I haven't finished decorating. The door is open. He can leave. That is what happens when you stop making life cinematic. You stop trying to create the perfect version of the prison. You simply stop needing the prison to tell you who you are. And this is why it produces peace. Because cinema requires movement. There must always be another scene, another achievement, another person, another problem, another resolution, another future. But reality doesn't require a climax. A tree doesn't need a climax. The ocean doesn't need a climax. A quiet morning doesn't need a climax. You don't need one either. You can simply exist and nothing has gone wrong. That is another subtle freedom. When you stop making life cinematic, you stop needing to be important. This doesn't mean you stop wanting success. You may still want money. You may still want to build something extraordinary. You may still want love. You may still want to become excellent. But there is a difference between I want this and I need this to prove who I am. The first is desire. The second is bondage. You can pursue the car without needing the car to say, I won. You can pursue success without needing success to say they were wrong. You can pursue love without needing love to say I am desirable. You can pursue wealth without needing wealth to say I matter. You can pursue anything, but nothing has to carry the weight of your identity. That is liberty. And perhaps this is why the non cinematic person can appear strangely attractive. He isn't trying to appear attractive, he isn't constantly checking himself through other people's eyes. He isn't performing confidence, he isn't performing indifference, he isn't trying to prove that he doesn't care. He doesn't need to be seen, so he can actually see. He can listen, he can notice, he can respond, he can be present. There is no character to maintain. And when there is no character to maintain, there is tremendous presence. Eventually, the man realizes something. He had spent years waiting for the great scene, the comeback, the recognition, the woman, the money, the success. The moment everyone would finally understand him, and then he discovers the great scene was never coming. There was no final scene, there was no audience, there was no moment when the entire world would finally confirm, yes, you are important. And strangely, that was wonderful news because now he didn't have to wait. He didn't have to become someone. He didn't have to win the movie. He could simply live. So perhaps the freedom of not making life cinematic means this. You stop asking life to entertain your ego. You stop demanding a plot. You stop manufacturing villains. You stop waiting for the climax. You stop rehearsing the future. You stop replaying the past. You stop turning every desire into a story. You stop turning every interaction into a referendum on your worth. So you stop asking, how does this fit into the story of me? And you begin asking something much simpler, what is actually happening? And sometimes the answer is nothing. And for the first time, nothing is enough. That is the freedom. Not the freedom of getting the life you imagined, the freedom of discovering that you don't need the imagined life in order to be at peace with the real one. And perhaps the final irony is this. You thought the cinematic life would make you feel alive, but it was the absence of cinema, the absence of the story, the performance, the audience, the drama that finally allowed you to experience life directly. The movie was beautiful, but you don't have to live inside it. The screen can go dark and life is still there. Life is not cinema. You ask why realizing life is not cinema gives so much liberty. Because cinema gives you a role, life doesn't. And the moment you start requiring a role, an enormous burden disappears. Think about what cinema does. It tells you, here is the hero, here is the villain, here is what the hero wants, here is what stands in his way, here is what he must become, here is the climax, here is the moment when everything finally makes sense. And when you unconsciously apply this structure to your own life, you start doing the same thing. You create me, my past, my enemies, my humiliation, my comeback, my future, my success, my relationship, my importance, and then you have to maintain the entire thing. That is exhausting. Cinema requires you to be somebody, life doesn't. This is perhaps the most liberating distinction. If you are the protagonist, you must protect the protagonist. You must make sure he succeeds. You must explain his failures. You must justify his sufferings. You must make sure his life is meaningful. You must make sure the audience understands him. You must make sure he eventually wins. But what if there is no protagonist? Not literally, you obviously exist. But what if you stop constructing a psychological character called me? The successful me, the rejected me, the attractive me, the intelligent me, the underestimated me, the future me, the person who will eventually prove everyone wrong. Then something extraordinary happens. There is much less to defend. Imagine carrying a suitcase everywhere. Inside it are every insult you ever received, every person who underestimated you, every achievement, every regret, every fantasy, every future plan, every person you want to impress, every person you want to defeat, every romantic fantasy, every image of who you should become. And everywhere you go, you carry it. Then one day someone tells you, you can put it down. You ask, but what will happen to my story? Nothing. The story disappears and you discover something shocking. You can walk much more easily without it. That's what liberty feels like. Why does the mind construct cinema? Because reality is uncertain. The mind hates uncertainty, so it creates stories. If someone ignores you, uncertainty exists. You don't know why, so the mind says, he doesn't respect me. Now you have an explanation. If someone rejects you, I'm not attractive enough. Explanation. If someone succeeds, they are ahead of me, explanation. If we fail, this is part of my comeback, explanation. The mind would rather have a painful explanation than no explanation because a story gives psychological control, but the price of the story is that you become trapped inside it. Reality is much simpler. Someone ignores you. You don't know why. You don't know. Someone likes you. You don't know what tomorrow will bring. You want something. You may or may not get it. You fail. You don't know what happens next. You succeed. You don't know what happens next. Your woman attracts you. You don't know whether anything will happen. A relative dislikes you. You don't know exactly why. And suddenly there is enormous space. Because you aren't filling every gap with a story. That space is liberty. The freedom of I don't know. This is one of the most powerful things you can discover. The cinematic mind hates I don't know. It wants this is happening because they think one day, eventually, when I become. But reality often gives you nothing. And instead of being uncomfortable with that nothing, you can simply say, I don't know. What does he think of me? I don't know. Will I become successful? I don't know. Will I meet someone? I don't know. Will my family eventually respect me? I don't know. Will I live in America again? I don't know. Will my life become extraordinary? I don't know. And then you return to the present. That's freedom. Cinema makes the future psychologically expensive. The cinematic mind is constantly living in Act 3. One day I'll be successful. One day I'll be respected. One day I'll find someone. One day I'll become extraordinary. One day they'll realize. And meanwhile, today becomes merely an intermediate step. Today is no longer life. Today is preparation for the movie. That's why you can spend years living and still feel like your real life hasn't started because the mind is waiting for the climax and the past becomes another movie. The mind also turns the past into cinema. If only I had, they shouldn't have. Why did I? If I had made that decision. And suddenly yesterday is being rewritten. But yesterday isn't happening. It's gone. You are experiencing memory, not reality. Yet the mind can make memory feel present because it keeps replaying it. So you live in two imaginary cinemas, the past movie, the future movie, and very little of you is actually available for the present. This is why your clarity increased. You said that when you started seeing this, your focus improved. Of course, because attention was previously being consumed by narrative. What does this mean? Where is this going? What will happen? What will they think? What should I become? When the story drops, attention becomes available. You don't have to force focus. There is simply less competing with reality. That is why peace can appear without being manufactured. You didn't create peace, you removed some of the things disturbing it. And this is why it can make you more attractive. Again, not because you've learned some technique for attractiveness, but because when you don't need to be important, you don't have to perform importance. You don't need to impress. You don't need to demonstrate confidence. You don't need to demonstrate indifference. You don't need to show that you are successful. You don't need to make people understand you. You are simply present. And presence is naturally compelling. The person who desperately wants to be seen is constantly looking outward. How am I being perceived? The person who doesn't need to be seen can actually see. That is a profound difference. And perhaps this is why ordinary life feels so peaceful. You said, I'm okay with being ordinary. Good. Because ordinary life doesn't require constant psychological production. You wake up, you eat, you work, you exercise, you talk, you laugh, you get bored, you sleep. Nothing spectacular happens. And suddenly you discover boredom isn't suffering. The mind was creating suffering because it believed something must happen. Why? Because the protagonist needs a plot, but life doesn't. So what does life is not cinema actually mean? It doesn't mean don't dream. It doesn't mean don't succeed. It doesn't mean don't fall in love. It doesn't mean don't pursue extraordinary things. It means don't turn those things into your identity. Don't make success responsible for your happiness. Don't make romance responsible for your completeness. Don't make revenge responsible for your dignity. Don't make recognition responsible for your worth. Don't make the future responsible for making the present meaningful. And then something remarkable happens. You can still pursue everything, but you no longer need everything. You can want the car, but you don't need the car to prove something. You can want the woman, but you don't need her to complete the movie. You can want wealth, but you don't need wealth to establish your worth. You can want success, but you don't need success to erase your past. That is freedom without renunciation. You don't have to give up life. You give up the psychological burden you've attached to life. And perhaps the final irony is this: you spent your life wanting a cinematic existence because you thought cinema represented freedom. The hero is free, the hero conquers, the hero gets everything, the hero becomes somebody. But the hero is actually trapped. He has a role to play, he has enemies to defeat, he has an image to maintain, he has a destiny to fulfill, he has an audience to satisfy. The ordinary person has none of this. He can simply be. And perhaps that is why the deepest victory is much less cinematic, because nobody has to see it, nobody has to understand it, nobody has to applaud. There is no climax, there is no final scene, there is simply the disappearance of the burden to make life into something. And when that burden disappears, life doesn't become less, it becomes much larger, because finally you are not living inside your story, you are living inside reality. The deepest freedom is not getting the life you imagined. It is discovering that you don't need the imagined life to be at peace with the real one. You don't need a comeback. You don't need an audience. You don't need everyone to recognize your worth. You don't need a beautiful relationship to make life complete. You don't need money, status, or success to tell you who you are. You can still want all of these things, but you no longer need them to complete the story of you. That is the difference. The cinematic life says, something must happen for me to be okay. Freedom says, nothing needs to happen. And suddenly, an ordinary day is enough. A boring afternoon is enough. A quiet drive is enough. A conversation is enough. Even nothing happening is enough. The mind stops asking, where is my life going? And begins to notice, my life is already here. Perhaps that is the real liberty. Not escaping life, not improving life, not winning life. Just no longer need life to be a movie. The screen goes dark, the story disappears, and somehow life becomes clearer. That is the freedom of not making life cinematic.